I read 7 books in January and February. No big deal. And in this video, I'm gonna rate them 1 to 5 stars and give my spoiler-free thoughts on each of them. Let's get right into it. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. 4.1 out of 5 stars. And this is the contemporary fiction genre. Okay, so in this book, 2 childhood friends who meet in a hospital as kids reunite in college to create a video game that catapults them into fame. They navigate success, failure, and their complicated bond over the course of 30 years. My first read of 2025. Woo! Yeah! After capping off 2024 with a couple fantasy books, I wanted something that felt real. You know, like set on Earth. Set on the planet Earth. This book's set in Massachusetts and California, so we struck gold with that. Yeah, so this is an incredibly popular book. You've probably seen it before, and I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't put it on my TBR strictly because it has a cool cover. This book started off a little slow. Honestly, reading through the first 5 or so pages, I was like, it was in DNF territory, if I'm being frank. They were just throwing around a bunch of big, random, unnecessary words and like adjectives. And to me, it just felt like pretentious and inauthentic, unrealistic that people talk this way, at least not the people that I know. So I was a little worried, but then all that just kind of like stopped after the first chapter or so. And this turned into a certified page turner. Even though it's not like a fast-paced, action-driven story by any sense of the imagination, it's more of like a slow burn, character development driven story. But I was cruising through it regardless. And the 2 main characters in this book aren't super likable, in my humble opinion. The relationship was odd. They were kind of odd. I didn't understand a lot of the choices they were making. With that being said, it felt real because humans are flawed in general, so maybe that's why. I did like the main side character though, but I think that was the point. Everyone likes that guy. That dude literally a lot in this book. But even though this is a character-driven story and I didn't really like the characters, I was still pretty hooked. I was hooked like a winter flounder. And that's probably because the characters in the story, their relationships with each other is so dysfunctional, and dysfunction makes for good TV at the end of the day. That's why we watch Love is Blind. That's why we watch The Real Housewives. But I will say, this covers a lot more deep stuff than The Real Housewives. I think, I don't really watch that show. And although this whole story is sparked and revolves around video games, it talks a lot about video games. You don't really need to know anything about video games to understand what's going on. And it also really delves into work life and how much that can consume someone. But at the end of the day, this is a book about relationships, platonic and romantic. It's about creativity, it's about ambition, love, friendship, fame, identity, and honestly, it's about so much more. It crams a lot into these 370 pages because there are a few twists in this book that I did not see twist, just came out of nowhere. And I guess that's the best kind of twist there is, right? Because I was shocked, I was appalled, I was flabbergasted, I was befuddled, I was bewildered reading these twists. The story overall tackles a lot of challenging themes, which just made it such a unique read for me. It's a book that made me think, it's a book that made me ponder, and a book I just thoroughly enjoyed. So vibes were pretty high starting off 2025. The Wood at Midwinter by Susanna Clarke, 1.5 out of 5 stars. This is the fantasy, fairy tale, short story genre. So this is about a young woman who magically communicates with animals and trees in the wilderness. And that's it. That's the whole story. If I told you any more, I'd be spoiling it because this book is so tiny. I was absolutely licking my chops when I saw this in my local bookstore because it's a 60-page novella and it's a certified cheat code for beefing up reading stats for the year 2025. But what I didn't realize is it's essentially like a kid's book for adults with pictures and like 10 words on some of the pages. Almost like a Dr. Seuss book or something. But this book didn't have any fun rhymes in it. And the story didn't really make any sense to me. From what I understand via Reddit, I think it's just supposed to capture a feeling of whimsy. And it's low-key pretty whimsical. And it's supposedly in the world or the universe of one of Susanna Clarke's other books that I haven't read yet. So maybe that's why it didn't hit for me and why I was so lost. Like I was a girl in the woods talking to trees, even though she doesn't really get lost. She knows where she's going. So I kind of feel guilty including this in my like total books read for the year of 2025. I feel like this can't count, right? Wait, does it count? This literally took me 10 minutes to read. I've read sports articles slower than this. And honestly, I was taking my time reading this. You could read this at the bookstore and not spend the $17 on it. But I do love Susanna Clarke's book, Piranesi. It's one of my favorite books, and it's getting all the flowers right now on Book Talk and BookTube for good reason. I'm a fan of her. I'm indebted to her because of that book. And you know what? That's why I supported her buying this book. At least that's what I'm telling myself. So yeah, I'm a fan of the author, just not a fan of whatever this was. Mistborn, Book 2, Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. 4.1 out of 5 stars. And this is the epic fantasy genre. For 1,000 years, the Lord Ruler has ruled, keeping the world in endless oppression. The sky is literally covered in ash. The land is barren, and I'm not talking about Baron Davis. And the lower class, aka the Ska, are forced into brutal servitude. But a daring rebellion emerges, led by a charismatic leader who can harness magical powers by ingesting metals. Pew, pew, pew. That's him. And he tries to overturn the Lord Ruler along with his crew and his apprentice. Okay, so that was a spoiler-free summary to the first book, Mistborn, The Final Empire. This book is number 2 of 3. And I'm not gonna summarize this book. I'm not gonna do that because I don't even want to hint at a spoiler, not even a whisper of a spoiler for you guys, so don't worry about it. So the Mistborn series is my first soiree into Brandon Sanderson. My first Sanderson soiree. And usually going into a sequel or like a season 2, sometimes you just like forget the things that happened in the first book or the first season. And so you gotta like read a SparkNotes recap or even like reread the book or rewatch the show to refresh your little pea brain, your little memory. And I didn't do that, because I'm lazy. And the first book's like 550 pages. So I was a little nervous, but I gotta give Sanderson his props because I feel like he recaps the first book and the magic system, the characters, the plot, everything really subtly throughout the first 50 or 100 pages of this book. It's almost like you could not read the first book and still understand what's going on and what happened in the second book. And throughout reading, I really feel like he takes care of you as a reader, ensuring that you don't miss anything vital. He like works it into the story again as like almost like a reminder. And maybe that seems like hand-holding to some, but for me, I was like, hold my hand, Brandon. Hold it tight, brother. Never let go. Yeah. Well of Ascension is a lot more politicking, a lot more strategy and build-up than the first book. So it was slower, for sure. Up until like the last 150 pages or so. Because then it goes sicko mode. So much stuff happens in the last 150 pages. But still, you know, doing the math, that's still like 400 pages of build-up, considering this is a 550 page book. That is taller than the average book. Hold on, let me show you. You know, like really, I feel like if this was the size of this, it would be a 700 page book. There's a lot of words in this. What's really cool about book 2, and I can't really remember if it does it as much in book 1, but we follow a bunch of POVs, and I was honestly surprised at some of the people that we get a peek inside of their mind for a chapter or so. It sort of humanizes everyone in a way, even if they're a bad guy. And although we do spend a lot of time with new characters, one of the best things this book does is advance the main characters that we already know and love as we watch them grow or devolve. So overall, this book was a ton of character development, plot development, world building, and not a ton of action, except the last 150 pages. Because this is essentially a 550 page lead up to a fast-paced, action-packed third and final book of the Mistborn series, which I'll talk about later in this video. All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker, 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is the mystery thriller genre. So this is set in 1975 in a small town in Missouri. Is it Missouri or Missouri? I never really know. At first, we follow a 13-year-old named Patch who becomes a hero in his town after saving a girl from an abduction. And this sets off a chain of events that profoundly affects Patch, his best friend Saint, and the entire town, the entire community. The story spans several decades, I think 30 years, and it delves into themes like friendship, trauma, obsession, and the impact of a single moment. This book absolutely locked me in a glass case of emotion. Oh man, I never enjoyed reading this, not for 1 second, but I also really enjoyed reading it, if that makes sense. Couldn't put it down because it's pretty fucked up. No, it's really fucked up. This book is a capital SLOW space BURN, but somehow it reads wicked fast. I feel like I'm really contradicting myself, but that's how this book makes me feel, because I don't think I've ever read a book with so much velocity before. I was like 06 Carlos Zambrano. Just friggin'. I think it's because the chapters are literally 2 pages long. That's a whole chapter. So there's like 300 chapters in this book, but I sneaky love this short chapter strategy because to me, as someone who still is a newish reader in the grand scheme of things, finishing these short chapters felt like multiple little wins, little accomplishments, little checkpoints that made me want to keep reading and be like, oh, I'll read another chapter. I'll read one more chapter. Then I'll finish that one in like 5 minutes. Oh, I'll read another one. Because they're like 2 or 3 pages long. And even though the chapters are so short, like something happens in each of them to nudge the story along, you know? Like, go on. All right, there you go. There you go, story. It'll just do something. Or it'll add a little intrigue or like develop a character's backstory. So you're not bored. You're not reading filler. That being said, I do think it could have been about 100 pages shorter. It's almost 600 pages long. But yeah, the character development is top notch. It's very rooted in reality. Their lives are forever altered by the traumas they've endured. And they'll do anything they can to get closure. But that closure is elusive. It's like guarding Kyrie one-on-one. He's too shifty. So it's very emotionally painful to read this. I'm kind of trying to make light of it to make this an interesting video and fun, but it's straight painful to read these characters because they've been through it. They've been through a lot of These characters are gonna stick with me, a couple of them, simply because of how tragic their stories are. It's heavy, man. This is a heavy book. Figuratively and literally. The book explores a multitude of themes, to name a few: obsession, child abduction, child abuse, murder, domestic violence, abortion, PTSD, art, what makes a person good versus bad, etc., etc. There are definitely some trigger warnings in this book, so maybe look it up before you get into reading it. The writing style or the prose, I still don't really know what prose means. I think it means writing style. It's interesting. The title is obviously called All the Colors of the Dark, and the author really does incorporate colors a lot in his writing to describe settings or even people. He writes pretty poetically, I would say, maybe even a little choppy at times. And there is a lot of dialogue, which I like because I always read dialogue faster than description. So in my opinion, it moves things along. But I also feel like the author, Chris Whitaker, probably prescribes to the show don't tell theory, because sometimes the emotion you feel is from the things left unsaid, and sometimes the revelations you have to the mystery is in the details left out. So you really need to hang on every word. If I was to compare it to another piece of media's vibe, it would be True Detective. I only ever watched the first season, so that one. I did not look forward to reading this book at all. Every night. It gave me nightmares, but once I started reading, I couldn't stop. Like I said, it was a very difficult read for me emotionally because of how dark the themes and the topics and the things that happen are, and it all just feels so real because this dark stuff actually happens, which is crazy and so sad. And I'm personally used to reading sci-fi or fantasy, and I don't blink twice when a supervillain uses a magical sword to slice off the head of an orc or some shit. But when a little kid gets abducted, that is extremely painful to read. It hurts more to read that. Honestly, I think if you like shows like True Detective or what was that one called? Big Sky, or just murder mysteries, thrillers set in reality, you're gonna be rifling through these 600 pages as fast as I was. But just a warning, you're gonna have a lot of emotional damage. All Systems Red, book 1 in the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. 3.8 out of 5 stars. This is in the science fiction / AI fiction genres. So in a corporate controlled future where security androids called sec units are leased to research teams, one sec unit has secretly hacked its own internal systems, granting itself free will. It calls itself Murderbot, but instead of going on a killing rampage or something, it really just wants to watch TV and be left alone. But the team it's assigned to is suddenly threatened by danger, which forces Murderbot to step in and protect its humans, despite it being a little socially awkward introvert. As you can tell, after that really heavy read of All the Colors of the Dark, I wanted something short and lighthearted, and I heard about this novella called Murderbot that was somehow the coziest read you could find. I made a whole video about All Systems Red, which is the first installment in the Murderbot series, which is actually being adapted into an Apple TV show in like 2 months. Murderbot's a short read, which is again what I was looking for after this behemoth. We follow the character called Murderbot, who is essentially a sentient killing machine that talks very matter-of-factly, is self-deprecating, lazy, socially awkward, and loves watching TV instead of working. It's pretty relatable. For me, it took until reading about half of this novella, maybe like a third, to get in a groove for things to get kind of grooving and interesting. What's great is you could read it on a short plane ride, you could read it at the beach, you could read it in a single sitting. I would say this is mostly a slow-paced read with a tiny bit of action sprinkled in. A lot of intrigue and quirkiness, some tech stuff. I really like the main character, but in the first book, we don't get a ton of like character development for the human team. I assume that we learn more about them in the subsequent 5 or 6 sequels in this series. Overall, this is just a nice, enjoyable, quick read. It won't like blow you away or wow you in a major sense, but you will not regret reading it. And I think that's kind of what cozy reads are for. Just supposed to be a nice little time, nice little escape from the real world. Book 3 in the Mistborn trilogy, The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. 5 out of 5 stars. And this is the epic fantasy genre. Book 3. Book Trois, Book Trace, aka the final book in the Mistborn series. I think the title of Post Malone's 2018 hit song explains my reaction the best. Yep, that's how I felt. If Book 2 was a slower burn, Book 3 was a blaze. I did not know how Sanderson was gonna land this plane, but boy did he do it. Brandon Sanderson, more like Captain Sully. The world building in the first 2 books was so vast, so complex, and somehow everything was explained in these pages and tied up with a nice little bow. And it is just so satisfying of an ending. And all the revelations that we learn in this book just makes me wanna go back and read the first 2 books to be like, Phil, you idiot, how did you see that? You Nimrod. This is seriously one of the best books I've ever read. I'm gonna miss these characters so much. The whole series took me on an emotional roller coaster of pretty much all highs. Just a roller coaster that kept going up. That doesn't make sense. That sounds horrible. This book was just so awesome that I can't even think of an appropriate metaphor. I would say that my final ratings for the Mistborn trilogy in order, 4.5, 4.1, and 5 out of 5. Just kind of going with my gut there. It's not like an official calculated rating. Red Rising is still my GOAT. Maybe that's just a nostalgia thing because that's like the first book series that I really fell in love with. But I'll tell you, Mistborn was certainly nipping at Red Rising's feet throughout reading this. I'm aware that there is a Mistborn era 2. I've heard kind of mixed reviews, but for now, I'm leaving it off my 2025 TBR because I just honestly have so many other books I want to read. But to Mistborn era 1, I love you, buddy. I love you guys. I'm actually currently working on a video review of sorts about Mistborn, so stay tuned for that. And I think it's gonna be really fun. I think it's gonna be unexpected. The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, 4 out of 5 stars. This is the literary fiction genre. And this is the story of Patroclus, a young Greek prince who forms a bond with Achilles, aka the Greek mythological hero who has a tendon named after him now. We follow these two as they grow up together and form an inseparable relationship that ultimately leads them to the battlefields of Troy, where destiny and fate tests their love and their loyalty. And I got a little gripe. Every video on Book Talk and BookTube was telling me that Song of Achilles was gonna make me cry. So I was fully prepared to bawl. And I'm not talking about... So you can imagine my dismay when I didn't shed a single tear during my reading of this fine novel. Not an inkling of weepage out of these eyeballs. And I know what you're thinking, but Phil, you're so tough. Like, of course you're not gonna cry. And to that I'll say, you're exactly right. Unfortunately, it appears I am that tough because my tear ducts were barren, bone dry. Yeah, for whatever reason, I didn't feel the same emotional resonance when reading this as others did. Like for me, a book like Sword of Kaigen had me choked up on a 7-hour plane ride, fighting back tears so that the random dude next to me didn't think I was having a panic attack. And this just didn't hit the same. That being said, I still really enjoyed it. The story is told in first person from Patroclus's point of view. And Patroclus is an intriguing character to follow. At times he can be like self-conscious and a little shy guy. And then in others, he's like extremely fearless. He kind of like gets jolts of confidence and just acts on them. So I absolutely respect that. And it creates a character that you feel like you know, but then he surprises you. But honestly, the meat of this book is about Patroclus's bond with Achilles. We spend a lot of time with these two as they grow from preteen to adulthood. Achilles is quote unquote the best of the Greeks, and he's a super charismatic guy, extremely talented at sword fighting, archery, and anything related to battle. He knows his destiny and is constantly reminded of his fate by his mom, who is terrifying. And Achilles lives his life striving to achieve fame and greatness. If you like Greek mythology, you probably know a little bit about Achilles' story. And I knew that going into this book that this was a retelling of the Iliad, but I also never read the Iliad. So that didn't mean anything to me. But I did Google it after I finished the book. All that to say, it's not a new story per se. The Song of Achilles just sort of puts a microscope on the relationship of the characters Patroclus and Achilles and examines their bond in depth in a new way. Definitely a character-driven book. And although there is some action, it felt like more of a slice of life novel to me. Can a book with centaurs be considered a slice of life? But honestly, the core of the story is between those two main characters, and that story feels timeless. It could be set in 2025, it could be set in 1960, it could be set in the prehistoric era. It feels real, the relationship. It feels pretty normal, honestly, even with centaurs bumbling around. And this book is written in a way that they talk pretty formal, pretty poetic, or just how you'd imagine people would talk in ancient Greece. That being said, it is super easy to read, except for the Greek names. You kind of just get thrown a bunch of names like Agamemnon and Andromache, and you just got to figure out who's who. But when you keep reading, you sort of do. I wouldn't say that this book is slow paced because I really enjoyed every second of it and was never like, okay, like let's move this along. But it definitely isn't fast paced. For me though, as someone who does like fast paced books and someone who's never read literary or historical fiction or romance, overall, Song of Achilles was a refreshing change to really dial in on character development and emotional depth, even though it didn't make me cry. And I'm pissed about that. The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter, 4.3-ish. out of 5 stars so far. And this is the epic fantasy, military fantasy genre. In a war-torn world, that's hard to say, war-torn world, I guess it's not that hard to say, where a caste system determines the fate of your life, Tao, a young warrior from the lower ranks, suffers a traumatic loss that just pisses him off. Unlike the noble-born who are gifted with superhuman abilities, my man Tao has no special powers, just relentless determination and an insatiable hunger for revenge. Yup. Finally started reading it. After squatting on my TBR for a calendar year, my eyeballs have finally struck page. Struck about 144 pages, actually. And oh man, does this live up to the hype. This is legit like straight fast-paced action for the first like 50 pages. And then you get like maybe a 15-minute breather, and then it's right back into the action. Crazy intense and gory battles, a sick magic system, and an African-inspired setting that is so cool. And from what I understand, so unique for the fantasy genre. So far, I really like the characters and all the world building. I have not an iota of a clue where this is going, and I'm totally cool with that. I'm here for the ride, baby. Strap me in. After reading a slower paced book like Song of Achilles, I came to the conclusion that my next book should be fast paced. And I'll tell you, we went from Mark Burley to Araldus Chapman with this. This is ultra fast paced. My only qualm with this book so far is that there are so many characters. I feel like every 5 pages I'm being introduced to 3 new characters. I feel like this is college orientation. I'm trying to remember everyone's name. The author, Evan Winter, does a great job of like painting the picture of these new characters in a limited amount of time through his detail and dialogue. You can really get a sense of who that character is, but point blank, it's just hard to keep up with all these new people. New lingo, new cities, new cultures, new pieces of the magic that we learn. Just kind of an information dump. You kind of just need to figure it out, and I think as I keep reading, I will just understand them. Just kind of having faith in my own intelligence, and maybe that's a mistake. That's probably a mistake. But even though there's a lot of new info flying in about new characters, new caste systems, setting, magic on almost every single page, this is somehow one of the more readable books I've read in a long time, probably ever. I feel like I'm speed reading. Honestly, I feel like I'm speed running reading this book. It's so fast-paced and action-packed. It's intense. Phil, why are you sweating? I was reading Rage of Dragons. The author of Rage of Dragons describes this book as a Bronze Age John Wick, and I can see that for sure. For sure. So if you like that or the movie 300, Gladiator, Apocalypto, but with magic, this is up your alley. All right, so that's all the books I read. You might think it's a lot, you might think it's a little. Let me know if you want me to do these kind of check-in videos bi-monthly. I thought it was pretty fun. I hope you guys do too. If you hate it, just let me know. I'll never make one again. I wouldn't dare. Also, let me know what other videos you'd like to see from me, what other books I should be prioritizing in my TBR, what other booktubers I should be following and watching their videos. I'm pretty new to the space, and I'm just looking for recommendations at the end of the day. So yeah, subscribe for more book stuff. Mikhail Petrus.